Welcome back to Take Action News, everybody. That music means that it's time for How It Should Be. Daniel Marans, you've been spending a lot of time thinking about the Bush legacy, in part because of the Bush Library dedication this week. Take it away.
Of course, I've not been spending a lot of time on the Bush legacy because it's something that I enjoy, but I do think it's something that it is worth getting those lessons right. There were a number of Bush advisors that were out on the hustings this week defending him. Keith Hennessy, apparently a Bush advisor, saying that he was one of the smartest, quickest policy studies out there. Well, David, as many of the listeners and viewers of this show know, I'm the policy director of Social Security Works, an organization that is trying to defend Social Security from cuts. And one of the biggest aspects of Bush's legacy is his attempt to cash the political capital that he earned, quote unquote, in his 2004 re-election to privatize Social Security in 2005. Okay, and the thing about this to note is that not only did Bush have this way wrong, and the fact of the matter is that our 401k and IRA plans lost 37 to 38% of their value in 2008 alone. And so if things had been privatized then, well, we'd have a generation of extremely poor people. The market fluctuates. Individuals can't bear that risk. The very idea of Social Security privatization is absurd. And of course, there are many other aspects of Social Security, like the fact that there's a higher replacement rate on people on lower earnings. It is a progressive redistributive program. It's done in a very moderate, modest way. It's not done based on need, but it does provide extra protections for people that have had bad luck in the labor market. And certainly thereafter, it's a market annuity for the rest. An inflation-adjusted annuity for the rest of your life. Nothing on the private market can provide that. But here's the other thing to note. This wasn't just genuine free market nonsense, even though genuine free market nonsense is still nonsense. This was also callous manipulation on the part of the Bush administration to use lies about Social Security to force fear about the program to make acceptance of that program, of his plan, more widespread, to make it a more popular plan, even though he knew that the public was not into it. And in fact, here is how he characterized Social Security in his 2005 State of the Union address. And again, this is SOT number 8.
System, however, on its current path is headed toward bankruptcy, and so we must join together to strengthen and save Social Security.
Now, of course, David, as you and I know, that is absolutely not true. It is not true now, and it never was. Social Security is not headed for bankruptcy ever, okay, under current law. There is a modest shortfall where it will be taking in more than it will not be able to pay 100% of benefits after 2033. Now, if you say that a program has a modest shortfall, that is not the same as a program being out of money completely, as in bankrupt. And the reason it has a modest shortfall is because, unlike any other program, it is entirely self-funded. It can't borrow to pay benefits. That's the only reason we're even talking about this, okay? And even then, the cost of that shortfall is really the cost of only making millionaires and billionaires pay the same rate as everyone else in the system, instead of having that Social Security tax capped at a base of $113,800. But Bush went further, and here's where it gets interesting, because Bush was uttering myths about Social Security that were similar exactly to the kinds of myths that are propagated nowadays by folks like Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles. The idea that the program was never intended to be a retirement program, that it was created in an era when people weren't living in it long enough to even collect it, and that somehow the worker-retiree ratio in 1950 was 16-1, and therefore the program is unsustainable. Here's how he also characterized that in his speech. Again, this is sound element 9.
Social Security was created decades ago for a very different era. In those days, people did not live as long. Benefits were much lower than they are today. And a half century ago, about 16 workers paid into the system for each person drawing benefits.
Well, of course, benefits were lower at that time, but of course the payroll tax rate was also significantly lower. The payroll tax base was significantly lower. In the first couple decades of the program, they were kept adding new beneficiaries without actually paying for it. Okay, well, we got that fixed. And in addition, if some economists estimate that if if workers' wages had grown in consistently with productivity in the past quarter century, then we'd be looking at a shortfall that was half as large. We could be talking about potentially even eliminating the entire shortfall if workers' wages grew at the same rate as productivity in the past quarter century and going forward. So has a lot to do with inequality, not so much to do with the actual amount we're paying into the system. Now, in addition, there's that issue of the worker-retiree ratio. Well, it was 16 to 1, David, in 1950 because they hadn't brought in all these people in the domestic workforce, in the farm workforce. They hadn't brought in all kinds of people. There were many people paying into the system who weren't yet collecting, the same as any pension system in its starting period. Since the 1970s, the worker-retiree ratio has been 3 to 1, and now it's going to be 2 to 1 and remain at that rate. It's still 3 to 1 today. I mean, this is just useless fear-mongering. And I might add, David, that the economy, in real terms, since Social Security was created, has grown 12-fold at least. The more our productivity increases, the fewer people we need to generate the same amount of capital. And in fact, it's worth noting that when the baby boomers were children, okay, the increase in the spending as a percent of GDP on education for those children was greater than the increase will be to cover those same baby boomers' retirement. And no one was saying then, oh, we can't afford to educate our largest generation of children ever. We shouldn't do any different for the retirement of our children today. Now, what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, privatization went down in flames. It discredited the Bush presidency and discredited the policy of privatizing Social Security. But what it also did was move the Overton window to the right, so that now any Democratic president or any even Republican that comes and proposes many changes to Social Security that effectively privatizing it by forcing people to get more of their retirement income from private sources that are a worse deal and create billions in fees for Wall Street seem reasonable by comparison. And that is not how it should be. We should be restoring our entire policy debate to truthfulness, and unfortunately what George Bush did was make any plan, including things like the Chain Consumer Price Index, now being proposed by Barack Obama, seem gone by comparison. And that's just not how it should be.